You worried about passing your CLEP test? Are you looking for math secrets to help you in high school? Do you love when people ask rhetorical questions and never answer them? Well, never fear, because Schmidt is here. Here we have some wonderful clickbait sent to us by Caden Kelly. Our goal by the end of the video is to take this 11% and change it up there to 100%. So let's get started. If you are watching this video, that means that you have done practice test 1. You're not going to get all of the answers to every question in this video, but as always, if you have any questions, please let me know when you're done. So here we go. For the following equation, substitute the following values into each equation and show all work. So what this is really a function. You're basically doing the function with the value of -3 in it. So in this case, the function with the value of -3 substitutes in here for x. So we get 2 times -3 plus 3, which gives us -6 plus 3, which is -3. A lot of times you will see people write this as the function with -3 is equal to -3. For our next one, we have the function that includes 0.75 as x, or 75 hundredths as x. So we would get function with 75 hundredths as x. That's going to be equal to 2 times 75 hundredths and then plus 3. Well, 2 times 75 hundredths, that's 1.5 plus 3 gives us 4.5 total. Or you can write it as the function including 0.75 as x is equal to 4.5. Finally, for our last one, we have the function of 1.5 is equal to, well, that would be 2 times 1.5 plus 3. 2 times 1.5 is 3. 3 plus 3, well, that is equal to 6. For the bottom 3 equations, I ended up giving you the answers. If these are not making sense to you, and remember, you can use a calculator, make sure you let me know. Okay. For the second problem, we are solving a bunch of linear equations. Now, linear equations are where you're trying to find the value of x by getting everything away from the same side as x. Our first problem, we're going to subtract 3 from both sides. So we end up with 2x left on the left side, positive 15 left on the right side. From here, we simply divide by 2. So x, or 1x, is equal to 7.5. That will be plenty of work for the actual CLEP test. For the problem on the right, I did all of the work for you. If you have questions on that, please let me know. For the next 2 problems, first step, I wanted to stop and show you, remember the distributive property. If you ever have parentheses, step 1 is always get rid of the parentheses. So in this problem, we get -6x minus 3 is equal to 2x plus 17. From here, it's just like solving a regular equation until we get down to the bottom where our answer is -2.5 or -5/2, depending if they want a fraction or a decimal answer. Our problem here on the right is exactly the same as what we've been doing, except it includes a fraction, which some of you may freak out and say, we didn't learn that. And the truth is, we did many, many times. There are multiple ways that you can get rid of this fraction. My personal favorite is if you did divided by -2/3 on both sides, and you can just do 20/1 divided by -2/3, remembering keep, change, flip. However, if you are very uncomfortable with fractions, another way is you could multiply both sides by 3 to get rid of this denominator. I get -2x equals 60. And then from here, I can divide by -2. But never fear, no matter which method you pick, you will still get an answer of x is equal to -30. 30. 1, 2, 3. Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. I hope you're enjoying this excellent math video created by the two-time defending 8th grade math teacher of the year from China Middle School. He's a pretty great guy, and I bet you keep asking yourself, how can I be exactly like him? It's actually not hard at all. You just need to be a math teacher. Teachers, especially math ones, have tons of free time, unlimited amounts of respect and admiration from their students, and as you can already tell, are swimming in cash. If you're interested in learning more, which I'm sure you are, you need to contact South Dakota State University. Go Jacks. 3 is asking us to graph the following equation using both a table and slope-intercept form. Our slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b, and I really hope you have that song stuck in your head, because if you don't, my job is incomplete. So, for this equation, our slope is -1/2, or the rise -1 and run 2. Our b, or our y-intercept, is -6, which is the order pair 0, -6. So our graphing will look something like this. Now, normally we make that table first, but I'm going to show you how, if you make the graph first, you can actually then go backwards and make the table. So we have our graph. It's all done. Excuse me. So we're going to make our table here. On the left, we need 5 values of x and 5 values of y. Well, we have the ordered pairs right here. The first one is -1, 2, 3, 4 for x, and the y value is -4. This one here is -2, -5. We have 0, -6, right there. We have 2, -7, right there. And finally, our last one is 4, -8. Now, you could make a table the old way by picking -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2 for x. You will get decimals. They will be a little bit harder to work through, but they will not be more or less correct than what we just did. Our next problem is asking us to solve and graph once again. However, this is not in slope-intercept form, or y equals mx plus b form. So I solved my equation for y, and I got 1x plus 3. Once I have 1x plus 3, I can graph it just like I did before. B being 3, our slope of 1, helping us find every point. And from there, I can make my table pretty easily by just picking points right off the graph. On the CLEP test, most of the time it will give you the graph and ask you which equation matches it, or it will give you an equation and ask you to match to one of the graphs. So you won't actually have to graph like this very often, but you need to be able to read them. Let's keep it moving. So our next problems are asking us to turn, and this is point-slope form, into slope-intercept form, which once again is y equals mx plus b. So for this problem, we have parentheses. Step 1 of any problem with parentheses in it is to get rid of the parentheses. So we are going to distribute the 2 to both numbers. I end up getting 2x minus 16. From here, I am going to subtract 2 from both sides. Make sure that the numbers go with the numbers, not x's in numbers. It's like boys and girls at a dance if Mr. Schmidt is chaperoning it. I end up getting 2x minus 18, and I am done. The problem on the right I did for you. It looks exactly the same, except we had a fraction for our distributive property, and it ended up giving us a decimal or a fraction at the end, but everything is exactly the same as what we've been doing. And that brings us to our second sponsor of this video. This video is sponsored, of course, by IXL. Do you have too much free time? Do you agree that overcoming stress will make you a better person? Do you like puns? Then you should use IXL. where words like ribbons and smart score will send shivers down your spine. Want to excel? I excel. Question 5 is kind of a long question, so we have to make sure we break this up into a few different parts. We need to create an equation of a line that passes through the following points in both point slope, which is right here, and slope intercept form, which is right here. Well, both of these things need slope. So step 1 is finding slope, which is rise over run, or change in y over change in x. For this problem, we are rising 4 and running 2, both in the positive, which gives us a slope of 2. Once we have that, then we can plug it into point slope form. And there are 2 options for this. Both of these are correct. Okay, so if y minus 2 equals 2 parentheses x minus 2, or you could do y minus 6, because that's the y value, equals 2 parentheses x minus 4. Now, most people are going to choose the one at the top because the numbers are smaller, but they are both correct, and they will convert into the same slope-intercept form no matter what you did. Now, I only did the top one, but if we did the bottom one with the distributive property, it would end up giving us the same thing, which is y equals 2x minus 2. If I graphed those lines, they would all end up on top of each other. Let's move on to question 6, which is systems of equations, one of my favorite topics throughout the year. And for the following systems, we needed to solve the problem using all 3 methods. Now, the first method is almost always going to be graphing. So each of these you have to convert to slope-intercept form. Now, I'm going to do that in the shortcut fashion. And if you need help converting it to slope-intercept form, look back at the last few questions that we ended up doing. So what I ended up getting here is positive 2/3, but it could have also been 4/6. So the first line we're going to graph in red. So that's going to be here. Okay, let's get our line out. There we go. And we'll do up this way just to try to get them on top of each other as much as possible. There we go. We add our arrows because lines go on forever. The next line we're going to graph in blue, or sorry, green. I thought I was colorblind there for a second. So it looks something like that. So I can graph my line just like this. I can graph it down in the opposite direction. Once again, I add arrows because lines go on forever. And so I get my point of intersection at 0, 1. So when I solve this the other 2 ways, I'd better get that same point of intersection, 0, 1. So when I have the substitution method, the most popular way is that you can set these equations equal to each other. So you get negative 1x plus 1 equals 2/3 per x plus 1. And then I can solve it like an equation down. Now, the way I'm going to do it is actually going to be a little bit different because I want to avoid a fraction. I'm going to take that y right there, and I'm going to plug it in for that y right there. So I'm going to get 4x minus 6 parentheses negative 1x plus 1 is equal to negative 6. The reason why I do this is I do not have the 2/3 in here. So if you are somebody who is not a big fan of fractions, this method will work just fine. So minus 6 equals negative 6. From here I get 10x equals 0 and x equals 0. The same thing I eventually get over here. I can plug this 0 into any equation that we've worked with, and you're going to get a y value of positive 1. And I'm not going to show you that just to save us some time. Our last step would be the addition or the elimination method. I did the top equation times 3 to get this equation right here. I then just add the equations together, and I get 10x equals 0, and now I have the exact same thing that I had here. So the rest of this equation is going to look exactly like what we've been doing before. I'm making you do all three methods because the CLEP test will require all three methods at some point, but it will never require them in the same problem, so it will not take as long as what we just did. Let's move to the line of best fit problem, which for the following set of data, plot the data on the graph below. There is one question later that talks about doing the regression line. Well, that just means the line of best fit. So we're going to do that here. And if you remember, line of best fit is always going to be slightly different for everybody. So I'm going to draw my line of best fit's going to go kind of right about there. That actually doesn't look too bad at all. You're trying to get as close to every point as possible, but you don't actually need to go through any individual point to have the best possible line of regression. Now, what I have to do from here is I have to find my slope. So I'm going to find corners on my graph, which there's a good one right there, which is 1, 40,000. And there's a really good one right there, which is 10, 90,000. From here, I just do rise over run, which ends up giving me about 5,000 divided by 9, or sorry, 50,000 divided by 9, which we type into our calculator, and we get about 5,555. So there's a lot of rounding that you can do here, but that is our slope. Easiest thing to do here would actually be going directly to making our equation. So the equation that I had made the first time ended up very slightly different. My slope was about 5,000 the first time, but you can be closer to 5,500. Remember, line of best fit is always going to be pretty close. You just want to make sure that you're getting as close as humanly possible. We already did this part. Now, there's something a little bit strange with the CLEP test is they find this mathematical concept called average point. Now, average point is not used very much. It's definitely not used in any textbook that I've had before. But all average point means is you average all of the x's, and then you average all of the y's, and you calculate what that average point would be. So in this case, our average point ends up being this. So if you have any questions on how to calculate average point, make sure you let me know, and we will figure out how to calculate that, because this is not going to be used much after this video. Our final sponsor is the Royal Bank of Scotland. Surprised they're sponsoring this ad and you're waiting for the joke? So are we. We're getting down to the nitty-gritty here. We have 3 questions left. A couple of them are going to be pretty quick, and one of them is going to be pretty difficult. So we're going to do one of the quick ones right away, which is what are the following probabilities, which we covered in 7th grade. Well, rolling a 6 on a 6-sided die. Well, there is 1 6 on a 6-sided die, so it's 1 out of 6, which is roughly 17%. I want you to be able to write them in both a fraction and a decimal or a percentage. Percents are just fine here. Rolling an 11 on a 20-sided die, that's 1 out of 20, and that's equal to exactly 5%. Pulling a 4 from a standard 52 card deck, well, there are 4 4s. There is a 4 of hearts, a 4 of spades, a 4 of clubs, and a 4 of diamonds. So that is 4 out of 52, which is 1 out of 13, which is very close to 7%. And finally, pulling a red card from a 52 card deck. Well, there are 13 red diamonds, and there are 13 red hearts, which gives us a total of 26 out of 52 red cards, which is equal to a half, which is equal to exactly 50%, as my friend 50 Cent would say. By popular demand, this is Mr. Schmidt showing you how to get more IQ increasing videos right to your computer screen whenever you want them. All you have to do is hit subscribe with that notification bell. It's so easy, even I can do it. So we are down to the final 3 questions in the first practice CLEP test. 2 of them are not too bad, but one of them is actually the hardest question on the test. So let's get started right away. For the first one, it wants us to, or question 9, it wants us to solve using both factoring and the quadratic formula. Both of these problems have the same issue, though. They're not equal to 0. So for this first one, I have to add 15 to both sides right away before I can do any factoring. Now, I cannot combine these. It's like boys and girls at a dance, so they can stand next to each other, but no touching. Once we're here, we can do our factoring. We are looking for the factors of 15. That can help us create the number positive 8, which is 3, plus 5. So I get n plus 3. I get n plus 5 equal to 0. My solution here is n equals -3 and n equals -5. If I do the quadratic formula, which I did down here, I end up getting the same thing at the end. I get -6 over 2, which is -3, and I get -10 over 2, which is -5. So I end up getting the same thing both ways. For the problem on the right, I have the same issue. It is not equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 3b from both sides. I get b squared plus 2b minus 35 equals 0. Now I'm looking for the factors of 35 that can subtract to make positive 2, which is -5 and positive 7. So I'm going to do b minus 5, and I'm going to do b plus 7 equals 0. So then my answer is b equals positive 5 and b equals -7. Once again, if I use the quadratic formula, I end up getting -14 over 2, which is -7, and I get positive 10 over 2, which is positive 5. I get the same answer both ways. So question 10 is definitely the hardest question on the CLEP test, and it will always be in the same format. It's going to give you an equation, and then it's going to ask you 3 questions from it. The first question is actually not too bad. It's just going to ask you the height after a certain amount of time. In this case, it's 2 seconds. That means that the value of t is equal to 2, and I simply plug that into the equation to get the height at 2 seconds. Okay, so the first one should be able to do. The next 2 parts are definitely harder. So the first thing is when it gives us this equation, it says it's equal to 10 feet. I put a 10 on the left side of the equal sign, and then I have to solve to make it equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 10 from both sides, and I get this here on the left. Okay, so I get my A, my B, and my C. I then do the quadratic formula, which gets a little bit messy here. So we got to be super careful when we're using that quadratic formula. However, at the end, you end up getting 2 answers, which is about 65/100ths of a second and 2 15/100ths of a second. So the ball is at 10 feet, 2 different places. The last question is the most important one, is when will the ball hit the ground? So we're solving the equation where it's equal to 0. So from here, my A value has to be -5. My B value has to be 14. And my C has to be +3. Once again, I'm doing the quadratic formula. X is equal to opposite B plus or minus the square root of B squared, which is 196, minus 4 times A times C. And then it's all over 2A, which is -10. Now, if I do all of this stuff underneath the parentheses, what I end up getting is -16. Or sorry, +16. Because it's 256. Square root of 256 is 16. And then I have this problem. So I split it up into 2 parts. I have negative 14 minus 16 over negative 10. And then I have negative 14 plus 16 all over negative 10. Well, this one ends up giving me a negative number answer, which doesn't make sense because you need to know how long it took the ball to travel. So negative time doesn't make sense. This one, however, gives me negative 30 over negative 10, which is positive 3 seconds. So it will take 3 seconds for the ball to hit the ground. Like I said, these are the hardest questions on the CLEP test. Making sure you're prepared for them will be really helpful. Now, the last question on the CLEP test is actually not the hardest one. Okay? It's using exponent forms. So I gave you 2 answers here on the right. But for the first one, what you're doing is you're doing everything in the parentheses squared. So we do 3 squared. Then we do x to the 4th squared, which is x to the 8th, because that would be x to the 4th twice. And then y cubed squared is y to the 6th. Well, 3 squared is 9. The rest of this cannot be simplified, so I'm done. Now, there is going to be one that includes a 0 exponent. You should remember that everything inside the parentheses raised to the 0th power is not 0, it's 1. Somebody is going to write 0 and someone's going to lose a point. But anything raised to the 0th power is not 0, it is 1. And that is the end of practice test 1. That's a lot, okay? And I'm expecting this to, need some help from here. That's okay. But as always, if you have any questions, please let me know.